Sister Catherine hadn't touched a piano in 47 years. Not once. Not even when she walked past the old upright piano in the community hall during her weekly visits to town. She would glance at it sometimes, just for a second, then quickly look away as if she'd seen something she shouldn't have. But here's the thing about memories. They don't just disappear because you want them to. They hide, they wait. And sometimes late at night when everything is quiet, they come back whether you're ready or not. Sister Catherine was 70 years old now. Her hands were wrinkled and spotted with age. Her back was slightly bent from decades of work in the convent gardens. But her fingers, those fingers were still long and elegant even if they shook a little when she held her prayer book. She had arrived at the convent when she was just 23. Young, full of conviction. Ready to leave everything behind. And she meant everything. Her family didn't understand. Her friends thought she'd lost her mind. But the person who was most devastated was her piano teacher, Professor Hoffman. "You have a gift," he had told her, his voice breaking. "A real gift. I've taught for 40 years and I've only seen this kind of talent maybe 3 or 4 times. You could perform in concert halls. You could record albums. Why would you throw this away?" She remembered standing in his studio that last day, looking at the grand piano that had been her second home for 15 years. She had started playing when she was 8 years old. By the time she was a teenager, she was winning competitions. At 20, she had given her first public recital. The local newspaper had called her a rising star and a virtuoso in the making, but something had changed inside her. During one of her performances, right in the middle of a Beethoven sonata, she had felt it. A pull, a calling, something deeper than the music, something that made even the most beautiful melodies seem incomplete. She finished the piece that night, took her bow, and walked off stage knowing she would never perform again. The convent she joined wasn't one of those modern, relaxed places. This was old school, traditional, the kind where rules were rules, and personal desires were things you were supposed to leave at the door along with your worldly possessions. Mother Superior Margaret was the head of the convent back then. She was a stern woman with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through you. During Catherine's first week, she had laid out the expectations clearly. "We don't come here to pursue personal interests," she said. "We come here to serve God and to serve others. Your hands are no longer your own. They belong to the work we do here." Catherine had nodded. She understood. Or at least she thought she did. The first year was the hardest. Her fingers would itch. She would find herself tapping rhythms on the dining table, on the edge of her bed, on the stone walls of the chapel. The music was still inside her, trying to get out. She worked in the kitchen mostly, peeling potatoes, kneading bread, washing endless stacks of dishes. Her hands, which had once danced across piano keys playing Chopin and Rachmaninoff, now spent their days in soapy water and flour. Sometimes at night, she would lie in her small room and move her fingers in the air above her blanket, playing pieces she had memorized, silent concerts for an audience of none. She would close her eyes and hear every note perfectly in her mind, the way the chord progressions built and resolved, the delicate touch needed for a soft passage, the power required for a dramatic crescendo, but she never spoke about it. Not to the other sisters, not during confession, not even in her private prayers. It felt like admitting weakness, like she hadn't fully committed to her new life. Years passed, then more years. The younger version of herself, the girl who had dreamed of concert halls and standing ovations, began to feel like someone else entirely. A character in a story she had read once but couldn't quite remember the details of. She moved from the kitchen to the gardens. She learned to grow vegetables, to prune roses, to tell when the tomatoes were perfectly ripe. Her hands got stronger from digging in the soil, more calloused from pulling weeds. They didn't look like a pianist's hands anymore. Then she worked in the infirmary, caring for the elderly sisters who could no longer care for themselves. She learned patience she never knew she had. She held trembling hands and wiped fevered brows. She sat beside beds during those final hours, praying softly while sisters took their last breaths. Mother Superior Margaret passed away when Catherine was 45. A new Mother Superior took her place, Mother Ruth, who was younger and slightly less rigid but still a keeper of traditions. The convent life had a rhythm to it. Prayers at dawn, work in the morning, more prayers at midday, afternoon work, evening prayers, supper, then silence. It was predictable, safe. And somewhere along the way, Catherine had stopped missing her old life. Or maybe she had just gotten better at not thinking about it. But the music never completely left her. It couldn't. It was too deeply embedded in who she was. When she walked through town on errands, she would sometimes hear music drifting from open windows. A child practicing scales, a radio playing classical music, a wedding ceremony with an organist. Each time, something would twist in her chest. Not quite pain, not quite longing, something in between. The other sisters knew nothing about her past. The older ones who had been there when she arrived were mostly gone now. The younger sisters just knew her as Sister Catherine, the quiet one who was good with plants and had a gentle way with the sick. One of the younger sisters, Sister Anne, once commented on her hands during dinner. "You have such elegant fingers, Sister Catherine," she had said innocently. "Were you an artist before you came here? A painter, maybe?" Catherine had smiled and shook her head. "Just someone who worked with her hands," she said. Which was true enough. But that night, alone in her room, she looked at her hands in the dim light of her bedside lamp. They were 70-year-old hands now. The veins stood out. The joints were starting to ache with arthritis. The skin was thin and papery. Could these hands still play? She flexed her fingers slowly, testing. They were stiff. They trembled slightly, but they still moved. They still remembered somewhere deep in the muscle and bone what they had once been trained to do. She pushed the thought away and turned off the lamp. 47 years was a long time. Long enough for the world to forget her name. Long enough for her to forget it too, almost. She wasn't that young woman anymore. That life was over. Done. She had made her choice and she had never regretted it, or had she? Sometimes, in her most honest moments, she wondered. Not with bitterness or resentment, just a quiet curiosity. What would have happened if she had stayed? Where would that path have led? Would she have been happy? But then she would look around at the life she had built. The sisters who had become her family. The simple joys of prayer and service. The peace she had found in letting go of ambition and ego. It was enough. It had to be enough. The piano in the community hall downtown was an old upright. Nothing fancy. Probably out of tune, but every time she saw it, something stirred inside her. A ghost of who she used to be. A reminder of the gift she had walked away from. She was 70 years old and she had accepted that her hands would never touch piano keys again. That chapter was closed. The book was finished, or so she thought. Because life has a strange way of surprising you just when you think you have everything figured out. Just when you think your story is over, a new page turns, and sometimes the thing you gave up long ago comes back to find you when you least expect it. The trouble started with the roof. Or maybe it had always been there, and everyone just chose to ignore it until they couldn't anymore. It was Sister Anne who first noticed the water stains spreading across the ceiling of the chapel. Dark brown patches that grew bigger every time it rained. Then came the leak during morning prayers. Just a few drops at first, landing with soft plops on the stone floor. Within a week, they needed buckets. Mother Ruth called a meeting. All 18 sisters gathered in the common room, their faces serious. The convent was old, over 200 years old. It had survived wars, storms, and changing times. But it couldn't survive without repairs, and repairs cost money that they simply didn't have. "The contractor says we need a new roof," Mother Ruth explained, her voice tired. "Not just patches this time. The whole thing. He estimates about $50,000. The room went silent. $50,000 might as well have been 50 million. The convent survived on donations from the local parish, small contributions from supporters, and the meager income from their garden produce sold at the farmer's market. They barely had enough to cover their basic needs. "We'll pray about it," Mother Ruth said. But even she didn't sound convinced that prayer alone would solve this problem. Over the next few days, the mood in the convent was somber. The sisters prayed, of course. They always prayed. But they also worried. Where would they go if the building became uninhabitable? They were a family here. This was home. Then Father Miguel came to visit. He was a priest from the downtown parish, a kind man in his 60s who checked in on the convent regularly. He brought groceries sometimes, helped with small repairs, and said Mass for them when their regular priest was unavailable. Sister Catherine was serving dinner when he arrived. She brought out the simple meal, vegetable soup and bread, and set it on the table where Father Miguel sat with Mother Ruth, discussing the roof situation. "I might have an idea," Father Miguel said. breaking off a piece of bread. There's a charity organization in town that helps religious communities in need. They're planning a benefit concert next month. They've done it before for other causes. Maybe they could do one for the convent. Mother Ruth looked interested but hesitant. A concert? What would that involve? They get local musicians to donate their time and perform. They sell tickets. The proceeds go to the cause. Last year they raised $30,000 for the Children's Hospital. It wasn't quite $50,000, but it was a start. Mother Ruth nodded slowly. Do you think they would help us? I can ask, Father Miguel said. But there's one thing. They like to involve the community or organization that's being helped. Makes it more personal for the audience. Would any of the sisters be willing to participate? Maybe sing a hymn or do a reading? Sister Catherine felt her heart beat a little faster. She didn't know why. She was in the kitchen doorway, technically out of sight, but she could hear everything clearly. Mother Ruth thought for a moment. Sister Anne has a lovely voice. And Sister Mary could do a reading from Scripture. Yes, I think we could arrange something. Perfect, Father Miguel said. I'll contact the organizers tomorrow. Sister Catherine returned to the kitchen, her hands shaking slightly as she washed the dishes. It was nothing to do with her. The younger sisters would handle it. She would stay in the background where she belonged. But that night she couldn't sleep. The thought of a concert kept running through her mind. Music, performance, the thing she had walked away from so long ago. It felt like the universe was playing a trick on her, bringing her past back to circle around just when she thought it was safely buried. 2 weeks passed. The benefit concert was organized. Sister Anne practiced her hymn every evening, her sweet soprano voice echoing through the convent halls. Sister Mary rehearsed her scripture reading, marking emphasis points in her Bible. Then Father Miguel visited again. This time his face was concerned. He spoke privately with Mother Ruth in her office, but the walls were thin. Sister Catherine, passing by in the hallway, couldn't help but overhear. The organizers are grateful for the sisters' participation, Father Miguel was saying. But they're worried it won't be enough to draw a big crowd. They need something more substantial. They were hoping for instrumental music, maybe. Do any of the sisters play an instrument? There was a long pause. Sister Catherine stood frozen in the hallway, her heart pounding. Not that I know of, Mother Ruth said slowly. We're a simple community. Most of our sisters came here without such skills. Sister Catherine should have walked away. She should have continued to her room and said nothing. But her feet wouldn't move. Then came the moment that changed everything. Father Miguel was walking out of the office when he nearly bumped into Sister Catherine in the hallway. He smiled apologetically, then something caught his attention. He was looking at her hands. She was holding a prayer book, but her fingers were positioned oddly. Stretched out, curved slightly, as if resting on invisible keys. She had been unconsciously playing a Bach prelude in her mind while standing there. An old habit she didn't even realize she still did. Sister Catherine, Father Miguel said curiously, your hands? Those are musicians' hands. Do you play an instrument? The question hung in the air like a dangerous thing. Sister Catherine felt everyone's eyes on her. Father Miguel's curious gaze, and she sensed Mother Ruth had stepped out of her office behind her. Her mouth went dry. She could lie. She could brush off the question with a simple no and walk away. That would be easier, safer. But something in her couldn't form the words. After 47 years of silence about this part of herself, the truth suddenly felt too heavy to keep carrying. I used to, she whispered. A long time ago. What instrument? Father Miguel pressed gently. Sister Catherine's voice was barely audible. Piano. The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Then Mother Ruth spoke from behind her. Sister Catherine? I had no idea. It was before I came here, Catherine said quickly. I gave it up when I took my vows. It was part of my old life. Father Miguel's eyes lit up. But you remember how to play? I haven't touched a piano in 47 years, Father. But you remember? Did she? Catherine closed her eyes for a moment. In her mind, her fingers moved across imaginary keys. A Chopin nocturne, a Beethoven sonata, a Bach fugue. Every note, every dynamic, every subtle shift in tempo, it was all still there, locked away in a part of her brain that had never forgotten. Yes, she admitted. I remember. Father Miguel turned to Mother Ruth with barely contained excitement. This could be exactly what the concert needs. A former concert pianist performing after decades away from the instrument. That's a story people would come to see. Mother Ruth's face was unreadable. The old rules echoed in Sister Catherine's mind. Personal pursuits were worldly distractions. Gifts were meant to be surrendered, not showcased, but these were different times, and Mother Ruth was not Mother Superior Margaret. She looked at Sister Catherine with something that might have been compassion. "Would you be willing?" she asked simply. Would she? Catherine's mind raced. Willing was such a simple word for such a complicated question. Was she willing to face her past? To risk humiliation by trying to play after so many years? To possibly break something sacred in herself by reaching back for what she had given up? "I don't know if I can anymore," she said honestly. "My hands are old. They shake sometimes. And I haven't practiced in 47 years. Father Miguel finished for her. "I know, but would you at least try? For the convent?" There it was. Not for herself. Not for glory or recognition. But for her home. For her sisters. For the roof that leaked and the walls that needed fixing. Sister Catherine looked at her hands again. They were trembling now. But maybe not just from age. Maybe from something else. Anticipation, fear, hope. "I would need somewhere to practice," she said slowly. "We don't have a piano here." "I know a music teacher in town," Father Miguel said quickly. "She has a studio with a good piano. I'm sure she would let you use it." Mother Ruth stepped closer and put a gentle hand on Catherine's shoulder. "Sister Catherine, I won't order you to do this. This has to be your choice. But I also want you to know that times have changed. We still believe in humility and service, but we also believe that gifts come from God. And maybe God has been saving your gift for exactly this moment." Sister Catherine felt tears prickling at her eyes. For 47 years, she had believed that using her musical gift would be a betrayal of her vows. But what if Mother Ruth was right? What if the gift had been waiting, preserved through all these years of silence for a purpose she couldn't have imagined? "I'll try," she said finally. "I can't promise anything, but I'll try." Father Miguel beamed. Sister Anne and some of the other younger sisters, who had gathered in the hallway when they heard the commotion, actually clapped their hands. But Sister Catherine felt a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. She had said yes. Now she actually had to do it. She had to walk back into that world she'd left behind and see if anything remained of the pianist she used to be. The concert was 3 weeks away. 21 days to remember who she had been and to discover who she might still be. The music teacher's name was Helen Rodriguez. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver streaks in her dark hair. When Father Miguel explained Sister Catherine's situation, Helen had agreed immediately to let her use the studio piano. "No charge," she insisted. "For a good cause like this? It's the least I can do." The first visit was arranged for a Tuesday morning. Sister Anne would accompany Sister Catherine into town. The convent rules required sisters to travel in pairs. As they walked through the streets toward the music studio, Catherine's hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Are you nervous?" Sister Anne asked, her young face full of concern. "Terrified," Catherine admitted. "I can't wait to hear you play," Sister Anne said with genuine excitement. "I've never known anyone who was a real pianist before. This is so exciting." Catherine didn't have the heart to tell her that it might not be exciting at all. It might be embarrassing. It might be painful. It might be proof that some things, once given up, can never truly be reclaimed. The studio was in a small building above a bookstore. They climbed the narrow stairs and Helen met them at the door with a warm smile. "Welcome, Sister Catherine. Please come in." The studio was bright and cluttered with music. Sheets covered the top of an upright piano against one wall. A beautiful grand piano sat in the center of the room, its black surface gleaming in the sunlight from the window. Catherine stopped breathing for a moment. She had forgotten how beautiful a piano could be. The curves of its shape. The promise of those 88 keys. "That's a Steinway," Helen said, noticing her gaze. "It was my grandmother's, probably the nicest thing I own. Please, feel free to use it." Sister Anne sat on a folding chair by the wall. Helen gestured to the piano bench. "Take all the time you need. I'll be in the office next door if you need anything. Just make yourself comfortable." Then she left, closing the door softly behind her. Sister Catherine stood there for a long moment, staring at the piano like it might bite her. Sister Anne watched quietly, seeming to understand that this was a significant moment, something that required silence and respect. Finally, Catherine moved forward. Each step felt heavy, like walking toward a cliff edge. She reached the bench and sat down slowly. The wood was smooth and cool beneath her. She lifted the key cover, and there they were. White keys, black keys, a lifetime of memories contained in those pristine surfaces. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. They were shaking badly now. She tried to steady them, but they wouldn't obey. She lowered them gently until her fingers rested on the keys. Middle C under her right thumb, just like she'd been taught 60 years ago. She pressed down. The note sang out, pure and clear. Just one note, but it filled the room and something inside her chest at the same time. She pressed another, then another. A simple scale, C major ascending, the most basic exercise a pianist learns, but her fingers stumbled. They pressed the wrong keys. Her timing was off. The scale that should have been smooth came out choppy and uncertain. Sister Catherine pulled her hands back as if she'd been burned. Her eyes filled with tears. Maybe this was a mistake, she whispered. Sister Anne leaned forward in her chair. Sister Catherine, you just started. You said yourself it's been 47 years. Give yourself a chance, but Catherine was shaking her head. How could she perform in 3 weeks when she couldn't even play a simple scale? This was foolish. She was foolish. She should never have agreed to this. She stood up to leave, but something made her pause. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was pride. Or maybe it was just that she couldn't bear the thought of walking away from a piano twice in one lifetime. She sat back down. This time, she didn't rush. She placed her hands on the keys again and just sat there, breathing. Remembering. Not the notes or the pieces, but the feeling. The connection between mind and fingers, between intention and sound. Professor Hoffman's voice came back to her from decades past. Don't think about the notes. Feel the music. Let your hands remember what your mind has forgotten. She closed her eyes and began again. This time she didn't try to play anything complex. She just let her fingers move, exploring, finding their way back home. A simple chord, then another. A basic progression that she had played thousands of times in her youth. And slowly, like a door creaking open after years of being shut, something began to unlock. Her fingers were stiff. They were old. They didn't move the way they used to. But underneath all that, the muscle memory was still there, waiting, preserved like a photograph in a dusty album. She played a few bars of a simple melody. It wasn't pretty. There were wrong notes and awkward pauses. But it was music, actual music coming from her fingers after 47 years of silence. When she opened her eyes, Sister Anne was crying. That was beautiful, the young nun whispered. Catherine almost laughed. It wasn't beautiful. It was terrible, actually. But it was a start. She returned the next day. And the day after that, Helen had offered her the studio every morning from 9 to 11. 2 hours a day to try to remember what she had once known without thinking. The first week was frustrating beyond words. Her hands cramped. Her arthritic joints ached. She made mistakes that a first-year student wouldn't make. She would play a passage perfectly in her mind, but her fingers would fumble the execution. Some days she wanted to quit. She would sit at that Steinway and wonder why she was putting herself through this. Why couldn't she just accept that this part of her life was over? But then she would play something, even just a few bars, and get it right. And the feeling that flooded through her in those moments was indescribable. It wasn't pride or accomplishment. It was more like remembering a language she used to speak fluently, like finding a part of herself she thought was lost forever. Helen would sometimes peek in during practice sessions. She never interrupted, just watched from the doorway with a curious expression. One day during a break, she brought Catherine some tea. "Can I ask you something?" Helen said, sitting down on a folding chair. "Why did you stop playing?" Catherine wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "I felt called to a different life. The convent required me to give up my worldly pursuits. But music isn't worldly," Helen said gently. "Music is, well, some people would say it's divine." "Maybe," Catherine said. "But back then I saw it as a distraction from prayer and service. A form of pride, maybe. I thought I had to choose between God and the piano. And now?" Catherine looked at the piano sitting in the middle of the room. "Now I wonder if maybe God gave me the gift in the first place. And maybe refusing to use it was like burying a talent in the ground." She smiled sadly. "There's a parable about that, you know." Helen nodded. "I know it well. My grandmother used to say that making music was her way of praying. She said every note was a conversation with God. I think I'm starting to understand that," Catherine admitted. By the second week, things began to shift. Her fingers were still stiff and her hands still shook, but she was getting stronger. The pieces she had memorized so long ago were coming back, note by note, measure by measure. She decided to focus on 3 pieces for the concert. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the first movement. It was famous and accessible, something audiences would recognize. Then Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, and finally a prelude by Bach. Together they would make a 15-minute program. Short enough that her old hands could manage, but substantial enough to be meaningful. But even as the music returned to her fingers, doubt gnawed at her. What if she froze on stage? What if her arthritis flared up? What if people laughed at an old nun trying to do something she should have left in the past? Mother Ruth visited her during the 3rd week of practice. She came to the studio with Father Miguel, wanting to see how the preparation was going. When they arrived, Catherine was in the middle of working through the Chopin piece. She didn't notice them at first. She was lost in the music, her eyes closed, her body swaying slightly with the melody. Her fingers still didn't move with the fluid grace of her youth. But there was something else there now, something deeper. Every note carried weight. Every phrase had meaning that went beyond technical perfection. When she finished and opened her eyes, she was startled to find them standing in the doorway. Mother Ruth had tears streaming down her face. "Sister Catherine," she said softly. I had no idea." Father Miguel looked stunned. "If you play like that at the concert, there won't be a dry eye in the house." Catherine shook her head. "I made at least a dozen mistakes. My tempo was inconsistent. Your hands told a story," Mother Ruth interrupted. "They told the story of sacrifice and faith and rediscovery. They told our story, the convent story." That night back at the convent, Sister Catherine couldn't sleep. The concert was 4 days away. 4 days until she would sit on a stage in front of hundreds of people and try to do something she hadn't done in almost half a century. She got out of bed and knelt on the cold floor, praying, not for success, not for perfection, just for courage, for the strength to walk onto that stage and offer what she had, flawed and imperfect as it was. And as she prayed, she realized something. For 47 years, she had believed she was supposed to be empty. That holiness meant erasing yourself, your desires, your gifts. But maybe that was wrong. Maybe holiness was actually about becoming more fully yourself, the person God had created you to be. Gifts and all. Maybe it had taken her 70 years and a leaking roof to learn that lesson. The concert was scheduled for Saturday evening at 7 o'clock. The venue was the community center downtown, a large hall with room for 500 people. According to Father Miguel, they had already sold 400 tickets. Word had spread about the elderly nun who was playing piano again after nearly 50 years. People were curious. Some were skeptical. But they were coming. On Friday morning, Catherine had her final practice session. She played through all 3 pieces start to finish. They weren't perfect, but they were honest. They were hers. Helen sat and listened to the entire rehearsal. When Catherine finished, the teacher stood and came to the piano. She took Catherine's wrinkled hands in her own. "Thank you," Helen said simply, "for letting me be part of this, for reminding me why I teach music in the first place." Sister Catherine looked at this woman who had given her space and time and a beautiful piano to play. "I should be thanking you." "We'll call it even," Helen smiled. "Now go rest. Tomorrow you're going to show people something they'll never forget." But as Sister Catherine walked back to the convent that afternoon, her hands were shaking again. Not from weakness this time. From fear tomorrow night everything would change, one way or another. Sister Catherine didn't eat breakfast on Saturday morning. Her stomach was in knots. She went through the morning prayers mechanically, the words coming out of her mouth while her mind was somewhere else entirely, on a stage, at a piano, in front of 500 pairs of eyes. Sister Anne noticed her picking at her lunch. "You need to eat something," she said gently. "You'll need your strength tonight." "I can't," Catherine said. "Every time I think about food, I feel sick." "It's just nerves," Sister Anne assured her. "My voice teacher used to say that butterflies in your stomach meant you cared about what you were doing. It's a good sign." Catherine wasn't sure anything about this felt like a good sign. Her hands had been shaking since she woke up. What if they shook like this on stage? What if she forgot everything? What if her fingers froze on the keys? The afternoon crawled by. Catherine tried to rest but couldn't. She tried to pray but the words wouldn't come. She tried to practice on an imaginary keyboard. But her mind was too scattered. By 4 o'clock, she was pacing her small room like a caged animal. Mother Ruth knocked on her door. "May I come in?" Catherine nodded, grateful for the distraction. The Mother Superior sat on the edge of the narrow bed. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Whatever happens tonight, you've already done something remarkable. You've faced a fear that has lived inside you for 47 years. That takes courage that most people never have to find." "What if I fail?" Catherine whispered. "What if I humiliate myself in the convent?" "Then you fail," Mother Ruth said simply, "and we'll still be proud of you. And the roof will still need fixing, and we'll find another way. But Sister Catherine, I don't think you're going to fail. I've heard you play. I've seen the way the music flows out of you like prayer. Trust that." At 5:30, a car arrived to take them to the community center. Sister Catherine, Mother Ruth, Sister Anne, and 3 other sisters piled in. Catherine sat in the back seat, staring out the window at the familiar streets passing by. How many times had she walked these streets, her head down, her life quiet and predictable, and now here she was, being driven toward something that felt both terrifying and inevitable. The community center was already bustling with activity when they arrived. Volunteers were setting up chairs. The stage crew was adjusting lights. Father Miguel was talking to a woman with a clipboard who Catherine assumed was the event organizer. When he saw them arrive, he hurried over. "Sister Catherine." "There you are. Come, let me show you the piano." Her legs felt weak as she followed him into the hall, and there it was, sitting in the center of the stage under a spotlight. A concert grand piano, even more beautiful than Helen's Steinway. The lid was propped open and she could see the strings and hammers inside, all the intricate machinery that turned touch into sound. "It's a Yamaha," Father Miguel said proudly. "They brought it in special for tonight. The tuner finished with it an hour ago. Want to try it?" Catherine climbed the steps to the stage, her heart hammering. The hall was empty except for the volunteers, but it still felt exposed up here, vulnerable. She sat on the bench and touched the keys tentatively. The tone was gorgeous, rich and warm, responsive to the slightest touch. This was an instrument that professionals played, and she was just an old nun who hadn't performed in decades. "Play something," Father Miguel encouraged. She ran through a few scales, then played the opening bars of the Moonlight Sonata. Even just those few notes sounded different on this piano. More alive somehow, more demanding of precision and emotion. "Perfect," Father Miguel said. "The program starts at 7. There will be a few other performers first. Sister Anne's hymn, a local children's choir, a violinist. You'll go on around 7:45. I'll introduce you before you play." 7:45. Less than 2.5 hours away. Catherine felt like she might be sick. She spent the next hour in a small room backstage that had been set aside for performers. Sister Anne came in at one point, dressed in her best habit, ready to sing. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Like I'm about to jump off a cliff," Catherine admitted. Sister Anne laughed nervously. "Me too, but we're jumping together, right?" At 7 o'clock, Catherine heard the hall begin to fill with people. Voices, laughter, the scrape of chairs, the rustle of programs. So many people. All here for the convent, some here to see her specifically. That elderly nun with the interesting story. At 7:15, the lights in the hall dimmed and the program began. Catherine could hear it all from backstage. The event organizer's welcome speech. The explanation of the convent's need. The gratitude for everyone's attendance. Then Sister Anne went on to sing. Catherine crept to the side of the stage where she could peek out at the audience without being seen. The hall was packed. Every seat filled. People standing along the back wall. 500 people, maybe more. Sister Anne's voice was pure and sweet as she sang Amazing Grace. The audience was quiet and respectful. When she finished, there was warm applause. Then the children's choir. 12 kids in matching t-shirts singing a medley of folk songs, cute and earnest. More applause. Then the violinist, a teenager from the local high school. She played a piece by Mozart. Competent but nervous. Still, the audience was generous with their appreciation. Catherine watched all of this from the shadows, her anxiety building with each passing minute. These were all nice performances, sweet, appropriate for a benefit concert. But they were also safe, predictable. What she was about to do felt different, more risky, more exposed. She wasn't just going to play a few songs. She was going to offer up a piece of her soul that she had kept hidden for almost 50 years. At 7:40, Father Miguel took the stage. "And now," he said, his voice warm and carrying easily through the hall, "we have a very special performance. Many of you have heard the story of Sister Catherine. She was once a concert pianist many years ago. Then she entered religious life and gave up her music. For 47 years, she hasn't touched a piano. Not once." The audience was completely silent now, listening. But when our convent faced a crisis, Sister Catherine made a choice. She decided to pick up her gift again, not for herself, not for glory, but to serve her community. What you're about to hear is remarkable, not because it's technically perfect. Sister Catherine would be the first to tell you it's not, but because it's honest, it's courageous. It's a reminder that it's never too late to remember who you are. Catherine felt tears on her face. She hadn't expected Father Miguel to say all that. She'd expected a simple introduction, not this tribute that made her sound like someone brave when she felt like a frightened old woman. "Please welcome Sister Catherine." The applause began. Catherine took a deep breath and stepped out from the wings into the light. The spotlight was bright. She couldn't see faces in the audience anymore, just shapes in the darkness beyond the stage. She walked to the piano, her legs somehow carrying her even though they felt like they might give out at any moment. She sat on the bench, adjusted her position, placed her hands on her lap and looked at them for a moment. These wrinkled, trembling hands. These hands that had peeled potatoes and pulled weeds and held the dying. These hands that had once played for kings and crowds. These hands that were about to try to do it one more time. She lifted them to the keyboard and paused. The hall was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat, and then she began to play. The opening notes of the Moonlight Sonata emerged from the piano, soft, haunting, the famous triplet pattern in the left hand, the melody singing above it. Her right hand trembled slightly on the first phrase, and she heard her mistake. A note held too long, the rhythm slightly off. But she kept going. She couldn't stop now. The music pulled her forward, measure after measure, and something strange happened. The nervousness began to fade. Not completely, but enough. Because this wasn't about her anymore. It wasn't about proving anything or impressing anyone. This was about the music itself, the mathematics of Beethoven's genius, the way the chords progressed and resolved, the emotion packed into every phrase. She had forgotten how much she loved this piece, how deeply it moved her. Yes, her fingers stumbled sometimes. Yes, her timing wasn't perfect. But she played with something that technical perfection couldn't capture. She played with the weight of 47 years of silence, with the joy of rediscovery, with the bittersweet knowledge of time lost and time reclaimed. The first movement of the Moonlight Sonata was about 8 minutes long. When she reached the final fading chords, she held them, letting them decay naturally into silence. For a moment, nothing. The hall was absolutely still. Then the applause began. Not polite applause. Not the generous appreciation they'd given the other performers. This was different, louder, more intense. People were standing. Catherine looked up, startled. Through the lights, she could see the audience on their feet. And they weren't just clapping. Some were wiping their eyes. Some had their hands pressed to their hearts. She hadn't expected this. She sat frozen at the piano, overwhelmed. But she had 2 more pieces to play. She took a breath, steadied herself, and began the Chopin Nocturne. This piece was different in character. More romantic. More delicate. It required a lighter touch, more nuanced dynamics. Her hands felt steadier now, warmed up from the Beethoven. The notes flowed more easily. She lost herself in it completely. The melody sang out, full of longing and beauty. The harmonies shifted beneath it like light on water. She remembered playing this piece when she was 19, thinking she understood what it meant. But she hadn't, not really. Now, at 70, with a lifetime of experiences behind her, she finally understood what Chopin had been trying to say. The piece built to its climax, then settled back into quiet reflection. The final notes faded away. More applause. Even louder this time if that was possible. Catherine's hands were shaking again, but now it was from adrenaline rather than fear. 1 more piece to go. The Bach prelude was the shortest of the 3. Clean, mathematical, perfect in its structure. Bach was like prayer, she thought. Ordered and eternal and somehow divine in its precision. She played it with the most confidence she'd felt all night. Her fingers found the patterns easily. The muscle memory was strongest here. In this piece she had played thousands of times in her youth. It was like speaking her native language after years of forced silence. When she struck the final chord, she lifted her hands away and sat very still. It was over. She had done it. The applause was deafening. Sister Catherine sat at the piano, her hands still hovering above the keys, trying to process what was happening. The entire audience was standing. Every single person. 500 people on their feet, clapping, some of them shouting encouragement. She turned on the bench to face them, and that's when she saw it clearly. People were crying. Not just a few, many. A man in the third row had his face in his hands. A woman near the aisle was clutching her husband's arm, tears streaming down her face. Even some of the volunteer ushers were wiping their eyes. Sister Catherine stood on shaky legs and gave a small bow. The gesture felt strange after so many years of keeping her head down, staying invisible. But the audience responded with even louder applause. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" Others joined in. She didn't know what to do. She bowed again, then started to leave the stage, but Father Miguel was suddenly there, gently taking her arm and guiding her back to the piano bench. "They want an encore," he whispered in her ear. "Do you have anything else? An encore?" She hadn't prepared an encore. She'd barely managed to prepare the 3 pieces she'd played. Her mind went blank for a moment, panic rising. But then something came to her, a piece she hadn't thought about in years, a simple hymn arrangement she had played at her first public recital when she was 13 years old. Ave Maria, the Schubert version. She knew it by heart. She would always know it. She sat back down at the piano. The audience quieted immediately, anticipation hanging in the air, and she began to play. The opening notes of Ave Maria filled the hall, simple, pure, sacred. This wasn't a showpiece meant to display technical skill. This was a prayer. And as she played it, that's exactly what it became. Every note was an offering. Every phrase was gratitude. Thank you for this gift. Thank you for preserving it through all these years. Thank you for bringing me back to this moment. When the final chord faded, the silence lasted longer this time. Then the applause began again, but it was different now, softer, more reverent. People stood again, but this time they weren't just showing appreciation for a performance. They were acknowledging something deeper, something sacred that had happened in that room. Sister Catherine left the stage, and this time she made it all the way backstage before her legs gave out. Sister Anne caught her, helping her to a chair. Mother Ruth was there too, tears on her weathered face. "You did it," Mother Ruth whispered. "Oh, Sister Catherine, you did it." Catherine couldn't speak. She just nodded, her whole body shaking with relief and exhaustion and something else she couldn't quite name. Maybe it was joy. She had forgotten what joy felt like. The rest of the program passed in a blur. There were closing remarks, more thank yous, but Catherine barely heard any of it. She sat in that backstage room, still trying to catch her breath, still trying to believe what had just happened. When the program ended, people didn't leave right away. They lingered. Many came backstage asking to meet her. Father Miguel tried to manage the crowd, but they kept coming. An elderly man who said he'd been a pianist before arthritis forced him to stop.
A young woman who'd given up violin to pursue a more practical career.
A mother with tears in her eyes who said, "You reminded me it's not too late for anything." Sister Catherine shook hands. She accepted hugs. She listened to story after story of people who'd set aside dreams, who'd buried talents, who'd forgotten parts of themselves along the way, and somehow seeing an old nun play piano again had reminded them of what they'd lost. "You weren't perfect," one woman said. "I could hear the mistakes, but that's what made it beautiful. You played like it mattered, like your life depended on it." It was almost 10 o'clock before they finally got back to the convent. Sister Catherine was exhausted, but she knew she wouldn't sleep. Too much adrenaline still coursed through her veins. Too many emotions swirled in her chest. She sat in the chapel alone in the dark, just breathing, just being still. Somewhere above her, the roof still leaked. But that would be fixed now. The event organizer had told Father Miguel they'd raised over $60,000. More than enough for the repairs with some left over. But that wasn't the important part. Not really. The important part was something harder to measure. Something about gifts and callings and the strange way life circles back on itself. The next morning at breakfast, Sister Catherine expected things to return to normal. But Sister Anne came rushing in with a laptop. The convent had one ancient computer for necessary tasks. "Sister Catherine, "You need to see this," she said, slightly breathless. Someone had recorded her performance on their phone and posted it online. In 12 hours, it had been viewed over 50,000 times, and the views were climbing by the minute. Catherine stared at the screen, bewildered. "I don't understand. Why would people—" "Because it's beautiful," Sister Anne said simply, "and because it's real. Read some of the comments." The comments scrolled past. Hundreds of them, thousands. "This made me cry like a baby. What a gift. I gave up painting 20 years ago. Watching this makes me want to start again. The imperfections make it perfect. This is what art is supposed to be. I'm not religious, but this felt like church to me. My grandmother was a dancer. She had to stop because of an injury. She's 82 now. I'm going to show her this and tell her it's not too late." By the end of the week, the video had been viewed over 1 million times. News outlets started calling. A national morning show wanted to interview her. A recording company reached out, asking if she'd be interested in making an album. Sister Catherine said no to most of it. She agreed to one interview with a local news station, mainly because Father Miguel convinced her it would help the convent, but she turned down the morning show. She definitely turned down the recording company. "I'm not looking to start a career," she told Mother Ruth. "That's not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" Mother Ruth asked gently. Catherine thought for a long moment. "It's about being whole. For 47 years, I thought I had to cut off a part of myself to be holy. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe being holy means bringing all of yourself, gifts and all, into the light." The news interview aired on a Wednesday evening. Catherine sat in the common room with the other sisters to watch it. The young reporter asked thoughtful questions. Why did she give up playing? Why did she come back to it? What did it feel like on that stage? Catherine answered honestly. "I was terrified. My hands were shaking so badly I didn't think I could do it. But then I started playing and it wasn't about me anymore. It was about the music. And maybe that's what I had to learn. That a gift isn't really yours to keep or throw away. It's yours to use, to share." The reporter asked her if she had advice for people watching. Catherine smiled a little. "I'm 70 years old. I'm not sure I'm qualified to give advice, but if I learned anything from this, it's that it's never too late. Whether you're 20 or 70 or 90, it's never too late to remember who you are." The video of that interview went viral too. Within days, Sister Catherine's story had been shared millions of times across the world. People called her inspiring, a role model, a symbol of second chances. But in the convent, she was just Sister Catherine. She still worked in the gardens. She still helped in the infirmary. She still prayed with her sisters and ate simple meals and lived a quiet life. The only difference was that now, once a week, she played piano for evening prayers. Mother Ruth had approved it and the other sisters loved it. They would gather in the chapel and Catherine would play hymns and classical pieces while they sang or sat in meditation. Her playing was still imperfect. Her hands still shook sometimes. Her arthritis flared up on cold days, but that was okay. Perfection had never been the point. One evening, about a month after the concert, a young woman knocked on the convent door. She was maybe 30 years old, with sad eyes and nervous hands. Sister Anne answered and called for Sister Catherine. "I saw your video," the woman said. "The one where you played at the concert? I watched it probably 100 times." "That's very kind," Catherine said. The woman shook her head. "You don't understand. I was planning to end my life. I had it all planned out. But then someone shared your video and I watched it. And something about seeing you play, it made me think maybe there was still something worth staying for. Maybe there was still something I hadn't discovered about myself yet." She was crying now. Catherine took her hands. "What's your name?" "Rachel. Rachel, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you stayed." They talked for a long time that evening. Rachel had been a dancer once. A good one.